the 8th, American Idol did something that they had never done since the beginning of their show. They decided to have a special show that would talk about giving back. And so if you saw that show, the celebrities got up and they gave the cause and the plea for the poor throughout the world. And they were in Africa, where children and orphans were dying. And as a result of the show, $70 million was given as 30 million people watched, and they brought to the forefront the greatest need that we have within the world, and that is to have the heart for those who are suffering or those that are poor. They know that 6 million children die in Africa every single year because of a lack of food, because of hunger. Whenever we read the Bible, we know that God is for the poor. God gives airtime in the Bible to 2,100 scriptures where He talks about the poor, those who are without. Because it is clear that God is in the slums. And God is in the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. And God is in the debris of the wasted lives and opportunity of millions of people all over the world. In January, Judy and I took a team and we went to the eastern part of India, where we saw things that we had never thought possible. If you look on this screen, right across from the church that we visited and I spoke, a church of 32,000, if you look out the back window, you'll see this is where people live. And they said to us, we want to take you over there. And from the bridge, we looked down and we saw the children playing in this infested water. It was very dangerous to go into that area, but we walked down into the area where those little huts are. The smell was like something burning. And the children that came up, and they were very excited, us being Americans, and they were just laughing and happy. And we looked into the various huts. Some of these are 8 feet by 10 feet. We walked inside. One family, we met the mother and the father. They have 4 children, and the father sleeps outside at night. I had never seen anything exactly like this before. We gave some of our resources to the congregation and to the church. That weekend we were there. But we're reminded today that God is in the slums. That God is in the debris of wasted lives and opportunities, and that He is concerned about the 6 million children that die every single year because of no food. Someone has said that God is with you if you are with them. And in Proverbs 14, verse 31, he says, "Those who oppress the poor insult their Maker, but helping the poor honors Him." I may not fully understand completely how much He loves them, but He does. And it brings us to something that is very, very pertinent, and that is a word that has been emerging over the last several years, and it's the word justice. And that word justice means to act with fairness. It means to have equity. It means to have moral rightness, deference to those who are on a weaker or in a weaker position. And it is the justice of God that causes us to be able also to have justice for those that are around us. And there's the prophets that are mentioned in the Bible, and there are actually 17 books of the Bible that are the prophets. Most of us would not be excited about a prophet because they're not user-friendly. They're rather rash and in your face. Do you know anyone that is like a prophet? They're kind of hard to deal with sometimes. But the prophets spoke on behalf of God, and they knew what God was feeling, and they would go before the people and they would begin to say things that people didn't want to hear. And in Micah chapter number 6, and I have a different translation here this morning, but in Micah chapter 6, beginning with verse number 6, is everybody here? Micah the prophet is writing to the Israelites, and he is saying here, verse number 1, he says, "Hear what the Lord says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice." The prophet said, it's time that you begin to hear what God is saying. It's time for you to be alert to the voice of God and to respond to what is happening in your nation. And in verse 2, he says, "Hear, you mountains, the indictment of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel." In Near East literature, they used a metaphor where the mountains were almost like a jury or a sounding board, as God had made a covenant with the people, and he says, let the mountains even hear what God has said. And he says, I have an indictment against Israel. I'm really upset with you. I'm not pleased with what you are doing. And then he says, what have I done to you in verse 3? How have I wearied you? Answer me. And he said, I brought you out of Israel, out of Egyptian bondage. I set you before you Moses. When the king of Moab wanted to curse you, I blessed you. And as God is giving this indictment through the prophets, and he's saying, what in the world are you doing? Will you not hear the voice of the Lord? Will you not understand what God is saying? The prophet cries with this fierce anger, godly anger in his voice. And he said, listen up, every one of you, to what God is feeling and what God knows and what God understands.